Limeade.
There we go.
Coming up.
Dude, can you see me?
Yes.
Okay, well, that's my iPhone.
That works.
Hey, a win's a win, right?
Yes, it is.
And how's the audio?
It's great. Yeah, it's great.
I got the goofy selfie that I wanted from you after all.
Excellent.
Alrighty.
Excellent.
So everybody that has joined us on Slack, on the PowerShell Slack team.
Alrighty.
If you're watching the screen though, and you don't actually know about the PowerShell Slack team,
Everybody that has joined
hey, Jeffrey, I think you need to mute your iPhone.
I need to do something. Hold on. How's that?
There we go.
Yes, that is much better.
Okay. So I was trying to get the questions, but I don't see them. Where do they show up? I see your videos.
So it would be either in the live podcast part of the PowerShell Slack channel or in the IRC. But you don't need to worry about it. We can ask you the questions that come in.
Yeah, I don't know about you. I've been using Chrome, and it just seemed to have gotten like total crap the last 6 months.
It eats memory like nobody's business.
Well, and it fails a lot, and a bunch of things aren't working. I mean, it's weird. I mean, it used to be like great, and now it sucks.
I have had I've had decent usage. I mean, I've been using Chrome for a long time. I actually noticed a change.
Great.
Did we get? We have the feedback again?
No, I brought up another browser. I brought it up in
there we go.
Thinking, well, maybe it's that. God damn it! Here, let me show you what I'm seeing. You tell me what I'm doing wrong. Can you see that?
Yeah, you don't have anything to the right of the video? You don't have a chat room thing?
Be right back, Jonathan.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, you know what? It doesn't matter. As you say, you can fill me in, and it's time to go, or pretty soon.
Absolutely. Al said he'd be right back.
Oh, fine. Time to go, and where's Al? Anybody joining us?
Yeah, we've got quite a few people in the chat room.
Yay.
Have a lot.
We've got about 63 people watching us live right now.
Oh, wow. That's good.
All right. I'm pinging all of the Slack people. And I will say something over here on the IRC channel if Joel hasn't already. All right, that's done. And I want to bring up a couple screens where I had questions from all around the internet. On PowerShell.org, on the blog, there are a couple questions. There's several that I saw on Reddit that I wanted to grab.
So with PowerShell being your baby, is open sourcing it like your baby going off to college or trying psychedelics or something?
And won't write.
Right. Okay, there are my posts that I have had there. Bear with me just a moment. Save. There we go. All right, everybody who's watching the stream who is not in Slack, you're missing out. I started to mention this earlier, but there is a Slack team, and you can find it by going to slack.poshcode.org, poshcode.org. If you don't have an invite, go there to get an invite, and you can join us in the live podcast room on that Slack team, where we have 40 or 50 people chatting with us right now. And Jonathan, everything good for you?
Yeah.
All right, excellent. I've got a couple of the...
We need a PowerShell icon with a neck beard now.
Yeah,
Okay.
a new one. That makes sense. Okay, I think I've got enough of my windows in a row. Okay, cool. All right, I'm ready. If you're ready, I'm ready.
Yep. We're all ready.
Tonight on the
Ready.
PowerScripting podcast, we are very pleased to have with us back again Jeffrey Snover. You may have heard of him. He is a technical fellow at Microsoft. He is a chief architect of Windows Server and System Center, and he happened to invent PowerShell. Evening, Jeffrey.
Howdy, how you doing?
What a day.
I am excited.
Isn't it?
This is a huge day. So I know it's been a little while since you've been on the show. It seems like there was a period of, I don't know, maybe it was after about PowerShell version 3 or so, where the releases just sort of, you guys were churning out lots of goodness, but each successive version didn't really seem to hit so hard. Maybe it was because you guys were pushing out so many builds. So everybody that wanted to be a part of seeing what was new on PowerShell, they got to see it and participate, with the new preview builds. And so therefore the
right.
final releases didn't hit quite as hard. That was at least my impression. What do you think about that?
No, that's the downside of this, doing things in a transparent, community-oriented way. Back when we would say, oh, silence, you'll be fired if you talk about the next release, and it's happening in 3 years. There's just dead silence out there, and then all of a sudden, shebang, and here's the new stuff, and it was a big deal. And that was great, except what if in between when we talked to you and we released it, your needs changed? Then, oh, sorry, we missed. And so now the community-oriented model, we're constantly having conversations, incrementally releasing things, et cetera. And so there isn't that big moment. Yep. No, that's exactly right. So, but I think in the end, it's a good thing. I miss the big moments. Today was a big moment, right? We were quiet about that one. But I do miss the big moments. But the reality is that in this tighter loop model we have, I believe that we're meeting the needs of the customers far better. But, you should tell me that. If that's not true, you should educate me.
I agree. I think it's really a marketing perception rather than anything else, because, we get the code. We get to play with the product. So just having that level of interaction and iteration is a pretty big deal. I enjoy it.
And you get to tell me if we got it wrong, and then we can fix it, as opposed to like, oh yeah, we got it wrong. Hang in there, buddy. 3 more years. Just hold your breath.
Yep. Well, today is a big day. You've got a lot of things going on. Why don't you let it loose? Tell us what you guys are announcing.
Right. Well, the big news of today is that PowerShell is now available on Mac OS and Linux, and that we've open source PowerShell. Wow. And so the Linux, we've got a few to start with, and there'll be many more in the future. So we've started off, of course, Mac OS, Ubuntu, CentOS, and Red Hat, and then we'll have more in the future. Yeah, so that's the big news.
That's incredible news.
Yeah. Oh, no, of course, we also then announced, PowerShell editor services and a support for Visual Studio Code and Sublime. And then again, later on, we'll have more Vim and Emacs. on Linux, and that we announced in terms of OpenSSH, which a lot of people know we've been working on, but what they knew was that we were taking OpenSSH and porting the client and the server to Windows. Here what we announced was this is not some arm's length engagement with OpenSSH, but rather we're taking OpenSSH and integrating it into the heart of PowerShell, so that, and layering PSRP under it, over it. So basically, when you're connecting to a remote machine, users will have the choice to connect via WinRM or OpenSSH.
So can you connect from WinRM from Linux?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. No, not right now. That's in a branch. Actually, someone told me, no, it isn't in the branch. So it should have been in a branch, because that code's not like the same quality as the rest of the code. But there's a good chance that it's there. If not, if there's a branch with it, and go, if you want to experiment, go kick the tires in that branch.
That's amazing.
Yeah, exactly.
So I guess what you're saying is you guys really haven't been that busy lately.
No, just been peeling grapes, reading Reddit.
Yep.
Well, it was incredible amount of work. And actually, it's one of those things, I don't know if you've noticed, but sometimes something will happen, and then you'll go back, like those movies, right? At the movies you see, oh, that was the person who did the murder. And you go back and you're like, oh, yeah, I remember in this scene he said this, and it meant that. And everything kind of clicks. Well, that should be happening right now, because if we've been working towards this for well over a year, and what we wanted to do was to learn. We wanted to get some things in order. So, for instance, Pester, right? So we took an open source community project, Pester, and we brought it in, and we acquired the great unit test framework, and that was a really big deal. What we didn't tell you was that was all about setting up. Well, it was about what it was. It was great. But the other part of that story was that we were setting up the processes whereby we could take community contributions and get them into the product and shipped in Windows, right? Can you do that? I don't know. Let's find out. Who do you talk to? I don't know. Who do you talk to? Well, it's probably legal. So let's go talk to legal. Like, hey, how do we do this? And they're like, I don't know, can we do this? Well, yeah, I think we can. Let's talk about it. What would have to happen? So we had to go set up all those processes, find all the people inside who had a vested stake in things, and set up the processes. Okay, how are we going to take this? How are we going to vet it, etc.? So a whole bunch of things. That was one. Doing the open source projects, DSC resources at first. Hey, how do we do this? We made some mistakes, but hey, how do we do this, etc. And then, working with other projects, right? So we participated in OpenSSH. Hey, how does this work? What happens if we don't agree? What's the governance model look like? How do you work with these tool sets? All gearing up for us to be able to go big now. So, one of the things we announced wasn't just, Joey found out about GitHub last week. We dumped a bunch of source code in it. Hope it works. No, we've been using GitHub for a while, and we're also announced a full governance model. So, we worked with our buddies. We looked at a number of those models, but in particular, the Chef guys were super helpful here. And in particular, Steve Morawski. We looked at their, hey, how do you do this? What are the important roles and responsibilities? So if you go back to the last year, you'll see we've been, a bunch of things will make sense now.
Amazing.
So you've been working on this for a year. How long have you
well over
seriously thought? Oh, well over. Okay. So how long have you seriously thought that it would happen? I mean, was there a point at which you were doubting that it would happen?
Baby, at Microsoft, until it's out the door, anything can go. Absolutely anything. So, last night I was like, crossing the fingers. Well, so, actually, that's actually sort of true. There was this thing that said, hey, we got to send the announcement, the blog and the announcement to Brad Smith. You know who Brad Smith is?
No.
Well, he's our president, right? He's the chief legal counsel. And so he's reviewing the wording of my blog. It's like,
oh, man.
Okay, don't know what that means.
So yeah, if you send it to him late, and if he would be the blocker. Okay, I see what you're saying. So it could have happened.
Yeah.
Well, it happened. You
It
shipped
did.
it. And one thing that amazed me was that there is a lot going on that GitHub repo. I'm talking about GitHub /PowerShell/PowerShell, which is where the main source code is, and I'm subscribed to it. My inbox is dead, man. So this is not just a let's upload some change sets once a week or once a month type of thing at all.
Yeah, no. It's actually been a ploy to sell you larger mailbox sizes in exchange. Yep.
Yeah,
And that's before we have all the community joining in. So, actually that's one of the challenges. We welcome the community. This is going to be really exciting. We don't know the level to which the people who before this were spending all their time writing code, and now they're going to have to spend time writing code, but then also looking at the community contributions and saying yes or no, or hey, how about this? And so we don't really know what that's going to look like. We're excited. We're really excited. But it's an interesting, hope that works out well.
Well, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, you still have the same program managers that are going to be going in and making some of these, these triage decisions and roadmap discussions and all that. But I guess the point is that now instead of a team of 5, of 10, of 20, it's going to be anybody on the internet that wants to have their voice heard.
Yeah, exactly. And that it's not just, hey, I think we should do X. It's, here's the code to do X. Oh, okay. Is that, hey, did I want to do X? Let me think about that. And then 2, hey, did you implement that code the right way? And then 3, you implemented, we did want to do X, you didn't implement it the right way. Is that your code? Or did you steal it from some GPL thing? You got to have a process to deal with all that.
So somebody has to check the code.
People have been doing this forever.
Right. I didn't think about that, about the GPL thing. Does GPL get snuck in sometimes?
Oh, it's a cut and paste world, my friend. Sure.
True.
Yeah.
Huh.
And these young guys right out of college, they're that's their model, right? Their model is, hey, I don't know anything different. Do people actually write code? I just cut, paste, and add a little glue here. I don't know where I got it. It was on the internet, so it must be okay, right? And so after you've done it a while, then people coming out of college don't have that kind of sensibility of, I got to check this license. Is that the right license, et cetera? So. That's fine. So
I want to go back up to the top and pick apart a couple of the pieces of the many parts of this announcement.
Yeah.
Going back to so open source is everything open source. What exactly was open sourced? How is it different than what PowerShell.exe on my Windows box version 5?
Okay, so let's break it down. So most everything's been open source. So there's PowerShell, Windows PowerShell. Windows PowerShell is the version of PowerShell that's on the full .NET CLR, open source. Then we had to refactor PowerShell to work on a .NET Core. That's the production version shipping in Nano Server. That's open sourced. ISE, PowerShell ISE is not open sourced. The reason for that is that control is actual Visual Studio. The editor control, it's Visual Studio. And we don't have permission to open source their code. There are portions of the system that are not open sourced. So for instance, WMI, we've open sourced OMI, but we've not open sourced WMI. WinRM, I believe we have not open sourced that. And I'm thinking, and then of course a bunch of the commandlets, right? So any commandlets that we did, they're open sourced. But if some sister team has written their own commandlets, they ship in Windows. You probably think of them as PowerShell, but they're actually just part of Windows. They're not part of PowerShell. And so a bunch of those commandlets aren't open sourced.
Okay. So,
But as much
will
as
we
possible,
see
we tried
that
to
change over time in the sense that, hey, the engine has gone open source? Would we expect to see, networking or clustering or, well, those are Windows features, but, some of these
Right.
others that haven't?
Well, ultimately, I think what's going to happen is people are going to look at our experience and see, hey, how'd that work out for you? And my expectation is it's going to work out exceedingly well. I mean, they're going to have all the same questions we had, like, okay, so how's this work? Somebody from the community took a look at my network commandlets and they added some code. Can I ship that as Windows? Like, how do I do that? And so we've got to get some experience there, and we've got to find out, hey, as we open it up to the community, how did that work out? Did we get some a bunch of was that a waste of time? Did we get a bunch of bad code and didn't really work, or are we getting great code? By the way, we sort of already know the answer to that with the open source and the DSC resources. It's been very successful. So we have to have more of those experiences, and we'll explain it to them, and then they'll make a judgment call for themselves.
So, was there any discussion over different types of licenses for, you guys used MIT license?
The answer is no. That's one very clear. You're an engineer and you have an opinion about a license. Why did you think we cared about your opinion about a legal subject? Microsoft has some of the world's best lawyers. Let them answer that. I mean, that's what their job is. And so that was a completely outsourced decision. Completely.
That works for me. That's
exactly.
My least favorite types of pinpointing and ranting on. I know a lot of people go there, but that's not one of my favorite topics.
But I have to say, I don't know about you, I'm thrilled that it's an MIT license. Anytime that I'm talking to somebody, I'm like, okay, well, what kind of license do you have? And they say, blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay. And when they say MIT, it's like, excellent. I have that thing in focus. That's a pretty great license.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. That would have been on my short list.
Yeah.
June wants to know about the governance model. So this kind of plays to the question of how you do review things that happen in the open source repository.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we've got the open source governance model published in GitHub, so you can get all the details. But we've got particular roles and responsibilities. The idea is that anybody can fork the code. Anybody can create a branch. Make changes. We felt it was very important that anybody be able to, fork the code, make a set of changes, build the product on their machine, run the tests, know that their change didn't break things, contribute test, please, and then do a pull request. And so then we've got a group of people by area who are the committers. They will review the pull request. I think we have even a layer there, subject matter experts, and then the committers. And the subject matter experts go through the process. They understand what the code has to do, et cetera, and they okay it. And then the committer says, yay, verily, and it gets committed. Now, right now, in fact, we're starting this with a community committer. Right, so Keith is a community committer on the PowerShell editor services. So we intend that the community will have more community committers, but basically you have to be an expert in the code and well-versed in the processes, etc. The PowerShell editor services, again, we did it on purpose. We open sourced that. We did that from scratch. Keith got very involved from the very beginning. He's intimately involved in the code. We trust him. And so he is a committer. Somebody does a pull request. Keith, a non-Microsoft person, can look at that code and say, yep, I'm going to accept that, put it in the source code. So we expect now, it was impossible for anybody to be an expert on the code other than PowerShell. But now that it's open source, we expect people will come up to speed on it, get involved, and we'll eventually have more community contributors.
And just to be clear, you're talking about Keith Hill, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Now,
long time MVP.
Yeah, very long time. Now, once the code gets committed, what's the course for getting that back into Windows?
Yeah, so basically we're going to do our development in the community, and do releases, obviously regular releases out of the community. And then at various points, we'll have official releases, right? So when you're pulling the nightly build, guess what? Don't call CSS and say, hey, I have this problem.
Right.
No, the nightly builds, all that stuff, that's community supported. And then at various points when we feel like we've achieved a critical mass, the community tells us we've hit the critical mass and the critical quality, we'll snapshot that and make a branch that'll be our official supported release.
Okay.
And then, chances are those will correspond with Windows releases, but it doesn't have to be. We'll do the .NET approach, right? The .NET guys have been doing this for a while. They develop on their schedule, and then when Windows has a release, they go back and say, hey, what was the last best version we had? And they drop that into Windows.
So a release for Windows, at least on the client side, doesn't mean what it used to, right? Because we just
Correct.
got the anniversary edition, or 1607, whatever we're calling that build. Are those the builds that you're talking of that could end up with whatever the latest vetted version of PowerShell is?
Well, let me be very concrete. So if you go get Windows 10 right now and Windows Server 2016, you'll see the PowerShell is PowerShell version 5 whatever. If you go to GitHub and you download it, you'll see it's PowerShell version 6.
Oh, okay.
So I think that clarifies it.
That's awesome. Now,
So there was a question about when version 6 would ship in what. So when do you make that kind of decision, in this kind of new world where you guys are shipping even versions of the OS many times a year?
Yeah, that's sort of TBD, but in general, we'll look at both, probably concretely, we'll take a look at when Windows releases, and then when other people need it, like OMS making a big bet on what do they need, when do they need it, and so we might release it. There's a distinct possibility that we release Windows 6 a quarter before the next version of Windows. Sorry, we ship PowerShell version 6 a quarter before the next version of Windows because OMS needs it.
okay.
And then the next version of Windows comes out, it gets version 6. It could be that we release version 6 with the next version of Windows, etc. So we haven't really nailed that down.
So to some extent, your release cycle is now decoupled from the operating system.
Exactly correct.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
So on the
By a lot.
on the Linux side, the commandlets that are specific to Linux, like there's a great video that was also released today. We'll have to have a link in the show notes for it, but there were some demonstrations showing some of the capabilities of PowerShell on Linux, and there were some cron specific commandlets, for example, that I assume wouldn't exist on the Windows version, or maybe they would. I don't. How does that work? Are there OS specific? I mean, there obviously have to be Windows OS specific commandlets that aren't going to work on Linux.
Correct.
How's that work?
Yeah, so basically we're going to have modules which will have tags.
Okay.
And that's where I don't know if you noticed, we introduced PS Edition. Did you notice that?
No.
Take a look at PS version table.
Okay.
And now there's a PS Edition. And so it'll say, I don't know, we've changed the names a couple times, but it'll say Linux or Core or Desktop or something. And that'll be a big switch. So you'll know what version you're running on, what edition you're running on.
Okay.
And then those then turn into tags that when you upload a script, you'll say, hey, this thing is Linux, this thing's Windows. And then you'll say find, module minus tag, Linux.
And how are you? I'm not a Linux guy. I've never been a Linux guy, but my understanding is that basically almost all the management on Linux, what you're essentially doing is manipulating text files and manipulating strings. Now, you're taking a inherently object-oriented language and bringing it into that world. That must have been an extreme challenge, and it must bring incredible power to that platform.
Yeah, so let's break this into 3. So the first is PowerShell on Linux. It's just another shell. So in Linux, you can say PS, pipe to awk, pipe to sed, pipe to grep, blah, blah, blah. And guess what? When you run the PowerShell, you can do exactly the same thing, and you'll get exactly the same result. So in that regard, it's just another shell, and everything you can do in the other shells, you can do in this. However, PowerShell really shines when we get structured data. And, there's this sort of silent revolution going on in Linux. More and more of the Linux world is being surfaced through APIs as structured data, through APIs as REST APIs, or as binaries that return JSON objects. And when you do that, we do a great job. So, if you take a look at AWS, right? All REST APIs, JSON objects. Azure, REST APIs, JSON objects. A whole bunch of things are being done that way. Now, the third part, and this is the thing I was really excited about the cron stuff, is that indeed there's a whole bunch of stuff that isn't that way, that's ASCII text or whatever. And there, the nice thing about PowerShell is, like, I just had some email thread or some comment thread going where some guy is saying, yeah, you don't know anything about scripting, you're an idiot, because I mentioned prayer-based parsing. And I said, look, let me be clear. I am not shy about my weaknesses. I do not do a good job. I suck at prayer-based parsing, right? When you run some Unix command and it's like, regex. Oh, how's that work again? I just hate it, right? I'm just not good at it. So I do know a little bit about shell scripting, but I do suck at text-based parsing. Here's the deal. With PowerShell, we can have somebody who's good at text parsing. Maybe this guy was trolling me, maybe somebody else. But somebody who's good at text-based parsing, that's great. Go do that text parsing, do it once, take that, convert it into objects, and now all of a sudden, me and you and everybody else can now deal with objects, right? Nice. They don't have to say, cut off 3 lines, or is it 4 lines, 27, 26, 25 columns? Oh, is that an integer? Is that a float? Somebody did that. Some really smart guy took one for the team, did that parsing, and now we have objects. And the guys like you and me can say, get me cron tab and show me the ones where the day of the week is Tuesday,
Wow. Do you have any idea how many Linux-specific commandlets there are already?
Cron tab, like 1.
Oh, okay.
We did that as a demonstration to highlight. Yeah.
There's some interesting conflicts that happen when you start to think about, now, of course, on Windows, you guys included a lot of built-in aliases. Do you want to talk about what you did or doing with those aliases on Linux and other OSs?
Yeah, so I'll just say that with the issue of alias, so background. So what we decided was that when somebody from Linux, Unix comes to Windows, they got a lot of muscle memory. Like whenever I go somewhere, I'm typing ls, I'm typing ps, and Windows guys are, whatever, you have muscle memory. And so the thought was, hey, let's have some aliases to help some people. So when in PowerShell, PS, we have an alias that maps to get process. So a Unix guy comes here and says, oh, what is this PowerShell thing? PS. Oh, look, processes. Oh, now it doesn't have the switches that it's used to, but it does have that command. So great. Now you take this and you're going to bring it to Linux. What do you do with those aliases? Right? Because if you go and you have PS and somebody use PowerShell and they do PS and they get process instead of the native PS, like that's going to be a lot of heartburn.
Yeah, and they're not going to like that.
They're not going to like that. They're not going to like that by a lot. They're going to say you have violated the sanctity of my shell. So we got rid of those, right? We pulled those out. But we do have this challenge, and the challenge is, well, wait a second. Some PowerShell script written on Windows uses get process or PS, and it means get process. So what happens when that script comes to Linux? So what we did was we took an initial stab and we shipped it, and then we're going to start an RFC on this. Some guy then, one of the very first pull requests we got apparently was the guy who's maintaining curl and wget, and he did a pull request to remove curl and wget aliases on the Windows platform, saying, "Hey, you're screwing up my stuff." It's like, okay. But if we just remove those aliases on Windows, we will break people who have written scripts to do that. So we got a little bit of a mess here, and we're just going to open it up to the RFC process, get community feedback. Ultimately, what I think the answer is going to be is that those sort of things will be in an alias file. And in your profile on Linux, like if you're a Windows guy and you want those Linux aliases to map to PowerShell constructs, then you have to opt in. Natively, we're not going to go bash those things, but you have to opt in. And so you'll just say like .source Linux aliases .ps1 in your profile, and everything will be good. And probably we'll do the same thing on Windows, but in the opposite direction. I don't know. We'll have the community figure it out for us.
Very cool.
Very cool.
Did any of that make any sense?
It did, yes.
Okay.
I think that's a good
All
way
right.
to handle it.
I'm going to pull in some questions from the chat room and from Reddit and some other places. What about, can you say anything about the ARM platform? There are people who are doing things with Raspberry Pis and so forth, and they're asking about PowerShell there.
Well, PowerShell's already there. Yeah, so Windows on Raspberry Pi already has PowerShell.
Oh, okay. That was easy.
Yeah.
Next. All right, I have another question. So there are some PowerShell modules.
Oh, but actually, so if they were asking Windows on Raspberry Pi, if they're asking Linux on Raspberry Pi,
ooh, yeah.
I don't know the answer to that one. But it's open source, baby. Go at it.
Try and build it. See if you can get it to go.
But let's be clear. It's open source, but at the end of the day, we're .NET, and so the .NET stuff has to be there. Now, I mentioned to you the 4 that we had. .NET's actually made some significant progress in the space, and they've got quite a large number. So we'll have to see what they have. So if they have something, then it should be imminently doable. Now, let me draw a distinction. There's doable, and then there's supported. For us to support something, there'll have to be a business case. Some things that sort of make sense. Now, again, here I'm going to just talk thinking and not plans, okay? Big distinction, thinking versus plans. So thinking. Azure, turns out Azure's kind of important. So thinking, we want to have a common management stack to manage everything that's important to our business. It probably makes sense for us to figure out a way so that we can get PowerShell on every version of the operating system that Azure's going to run.
Right, those would be the priority.
Exactly. And so then somebody says, well, what about, Synix or HPUX? And the answer is, well, 1, does .NET there? And then 2, does there a business thing? Is there a business justification to support it? So it might be that the technology is there and it's supported through the community, but we might not choose to have an official release and support it. That's more of a business case.
Gotcha. So I have a question about some of the Microsoft modules that are related to some of your products that are inherently managed remotely. Thinking about Active Directory, Exchange, and Azure is a great example here as well. Will we see those modules ported to work on the new open PowerShell? Yeah,
so Azure is already there. And the other ones, we haven't gone public now. We'll start to have those conversations with people. I will point out that they work with PowerShell implicit remoting, which is to say that you'll be able to get on Linux, create a PSRP connection to that remote server, import that module, and then all those commandlets are there on the machine. They're there because they're proxy commands. And when you run them, we gather up all the arguments and run them on the remote machine. So that will work absolutely. Whether or not those modules will run natively on Linux is a business decision for those teams to make.
Gotcha.
So I imagine,
and often that's a function of their instrumentation model. Like Azure was pretty simple because they call REST APIs, right? So they're just and that's on .NET. That's pretty simple. Active Directory is much more difficult, I should imagine, right? Because they're talking a different protocol, and the question is that protocol now implemented in .NET on Linux? I don't know the answer to that question. But if it is, then they have a business choice to make. If it isn't, then there's a lot of work to be done.
Mm-hmm.
But again, with implicit remoting, you don't have to do that. You can get access to that function without all that work.
Would it be possible for a module that has binary pieces to ever work on Linux? Or would
Sure.
it only be script-based modules?
No.
Oh, okay.
No. It's if it's .NET, it works.
Oh, okay. Perfect.
No, it's got to be .NET that's supported by the .NET framework.
Okay.
Right? Because remember, it's .NET Core, not full .NET. So look, ISE. Why isn't ISE on Linux? Right? Because it's .NET, and the answer is, yep, it's .NET calling WPF, which calls GDI. GDI is not on Linux. WPF's not going to be on Linux. We're not going to port those things to Linux. So ISE ain't going to be on Linux.
That makes sense.
Gotcha. So let me see here. What about so the commandlets that and Jonathan mentioned this a little bit before, but I wanted to drill down a little further. Commandlets that we might see that are Linux specific ahead of time. So the cron tab was one example. Do you think that Microsoft will be investing much in that area, or do you basically see that is something that the community will fill?
Ultimately,
Is that what does
don't have a
Azure
good
need question?
yeah, exactly correct. Azure OMS, what are the needs?
Yeah.
And if it
there's
makes
some easy
sense,
things
we'll
to
do
think
that.
about, like changing permissions. There's nothing to do with ACLs. There's no ACL commandlets on Linux, but change mod is so someone could think, okay, well, let's make a module for working with file permissions, for example.
Yep. Although that one's so simple, maybe not. But yeah. So basically, it'll be driven by the business cases, and the dominant business cases will probably be Azure and OMS.
Scrolling forward.
We can't hear you when you're... Okay, there you go.
I know, it's because I was talking to myself. So Mark asked in the chat room, for Linux services, would you expect that we would want to use like a get service commandlet, or would we need a new prefix like get Linux service?
Yep, probably new prefixes. Now, that said, let's be clear. So, how to say this? There's always been this question of how different can two things be and plug underneath the same commandlet. And honestly, I don't think we have a good answer to that. Let me be concrete. Get service is a pretty weak command, right? It's just pretty weak command. There's a whole bunch of things you care about services that you can't do in get service. And the reason why you can't do it in get service is because you can't do them in .NET, right? Like get the owner, there's a whole bunch of things. But all that information is available through WMI. So at some point we've said, hey, we just need to have a version that works with WMI and then surface all that great stuff. Now, let's say we did that. How do you surface it, right? So one answer would be to say, well, you'd have a separate get service, get WMI service, and one would work one way and the others would work the other. And the other thought is, well, that's going to be hard to discover, and it's going to kind of pollute the namespace. I mean, maybe, and really the only, I don't know. Maybe we should just have get service and then have two parameter sets. Get service works exactly as it works today, and then there's get service with a parameter set dash WMI or as WMI, and it has an additional set of parameters that you can provide. And ultimately, we've never answered that question satisfactory to my satisfaction. So now let's just talk pure Linux. The reality is Linux is has a healthy dose of inconsistency, right? So today I just filmed a demo with Christopher Bash, and what he did was he said, I'm going to use desired state configuration to configure Apache. The problem is Apache uses different packages names based upon the different distributions, and where it gets installed is different paths on different distributions. And that's just Linux, right?
Yeah.
And so how do we do that? Do we want to say, hey, start Ubuntu Apache, start CentOS Apache? Or do we want to say, hey, start Apache, and then underneath our cmdlets, we're going to try and mask over some of the differences in Unix? And I think anyway, we're going to have that conversation. I'm pretty optimistic about going down that path of saying, hey, PowerShell, look, you already have the ways to manage your disparate Unix stuff, right? And it's kind of messy. Maybe there's a value proposition here for PowerShell to come in and provide that normalized interface across things. So this way, here's the way we do it, and we map the differences across the systems. Maybe.
I can think of some ways that would be wonderful, yet at the same time, you'd see a lot of resistance to that.
Well, let me just be clear.
The execution.
Let me just be clear. That's exactly what I did at Tivoli, 20 years ago? And that turned into $1 billion business, right? So it turns out that model works pretty well.
All right, fair enough. So June wants to know, should we use user voice or GitHub issues?
Ask Joey.
Okay, we will ask Joey. Hey, Joey. That question is for you. Okay, I put it in the chat room, so he'll see it. Let's see. What about DSC? Are we going to see, will those modules tend to work on the new PowerShell? It seems to me that a lot of those are not binary. Trying to work through my head if there would be a reason that those would not work.
It's just a function of whether or not the managed elements are the same. If they are, yep, they'll work.
Excellent.
But a bunch of the managed elements are going to be different, I would expect.
So here's
like if you've got
question.
desired state configuration for Azure or AWS, I bet you that's going to work just fine.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
And like VMware. We've talked to the VMware guys. I don't know where they are on their desired state configuration stuff, but they'll be able to do desired state configuration modules that'll work across both environments perfectly.
So how would you expect module authors to manage what they're doing, to make this code work on multiple platforms? Somebody mentioned in the chat room there's a new requires statement. I guess that'll hit against the addition.
Honestly, this is just going to be a topic we're going to have to do a seminar on. Hey, here's how you write it, and show a bunch of examples. And the answer is not well suited for a podcast. Sure. We got to go show it.
Yep, fair enough. Let's see. I've got more questions. I'm scrolling through here. Okay. Have you guys thought about integrations with other scripting languages? Python seems to come up a lot.
Yeah. Did you see the video of in the blog I mentioned? So I had the blog today, and then the first half hour we didn't embed the video, and then we updated that. So if you look at it now, we have an embedded video. That I started off with Matt McSpirit, and then we got a bunch of great demonstrations.
Yes.
Awesome. So that's the one we had. Crontab, we have AWS, we have VMware, and then what was your question again? Because I forgot. But I have a video. I have a demo of it. Python. And so Jason Shirk demoed integration with Python. Works just great. And so he showed how, look, you can just run it like an executable. It's a little bit easier because of the intrinsic nature of PowerShell. But then you can assign it to a variable. You can integrate it into expressions. And anyway, just went through a deep thing, and it works really, really well. Really well.
Awesome. We'll put a link in the show notes to some of these assets and make sure that everybody has seen them if they have not already.
Yeah. Yeah, and then
Right.
and then he made the point, hey, I showed you all this with Python, but the reality is this will work equally well with Ruby, Perl, whatever you have.
All right. Let's see. More questions. Everybody is saying thank you. Let's see. A lot of DSC. You mentioned earlier interacting with Steve Morawski at Chef.
Yep.
What were some of the? Chef has been cross-platform for a lot longer than you guys have. Were there specific things that they were able to help you with?
Well, a lot on the governance model. Yep, a lot there. Here's the roles that you have to have. Here's how you want to set up your branches. Yep, super helpful.
I wonder what the first Linux distro will be that will include PowerShell.
The race is on.
Somebody quick fork and make a new Linux distro just to put PowerShell in it.
You've got my Bash in my Windows. You've got my PowerShell.
Just strip out Bash. Just strip it out. So this is something you guys have always said. I've heard you say it, and other people in the PowerShell team say this all the time, that PowerShell is just a tool. If it works for you, kind of use what works. Are there particular things that you think that people on Linux, on OS X, might take to more quickly? Where you think that PowerShell kind of does it better?
Look, we try and approach this with a great deal of humbleness, and the Unix guys are very proud of their tools, and they have a lot of right to be proud of those tools. So, go Bears. We are making this available for lots of different reasons. There's basically 4 scenarios, right? 1, PowerShell users. There's existing PowerShell users that need to manage Linux as well as Windows. And now they can use the tools and skills that they have to manage that. Guess what? Those people, now their scope, what they can do, just got larger. Those people became more marketable and more valuable. Yay. I love it when my users can earn more money. So happy days. Number 2, PowerShell is an infrastructure that management products build upon. Chef and Puppet are examples of great DevOps tools that build upon PowerShell. Guess what? System Center and Operations Management Suite are as well. Operations Management Suite, the mission for it is to be able to manage any workload, Linux or Windows, anywhere in the world, right? AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, on-premises, using Hyper-V, VMware, wherever. Any workload on any environment. That's the mission. How do they make it true, right? Well, they're layered on top of PowerShell. If PowerShell only works on Windows, they can't achieve their mission. So now the fact that PowerShell is going to be available on Linux means that we can achieve that mission. So that's mission number 2. First one, PowerShell users. Second one, management products. Number 3, there's a whole bunch of teams that would like to standardize on a single set of infrastructure, single set of management tools to manage all the assets in their system. They don't want to have the Windows team and their set of tools and the Unix team and their set of tools. They want to have their management team and that set of tools. And now, for the first time ever, those people can standardize on a management platform to manage everything in the environment.
Wow.
And then there is the management products, right? The products like AWS and PowerCLI and Exchange and SQL and all these things. PowerShell, the great architecture of PowerShell is such that these teams were able to write a very small amount of code, the commandlets that they and only they could write. But plugging into PowerShell, they were then able to light up this vast ecosystem of management tools, right? Outputters and formatters and remoting and workflow and this and this and this and this, all this great stuff with a very small amount of work. Now, that's great, except now those folks need to be able to do more than just Windows, right? PowerCLI, this has been a big thorn in their side, right? Alan Renault talks about how the Unix guys weren't feeling the love. They're like, hey, how come these Windows guys have these great tools and we get the second-class automation? What the heck? So that was a real problem. And now those tools, those products will be able to take and, again, leverage PowerShell and deliver that great automation to all of their customers. So then there's I'm just a Linux guy, and I'm either happy with what I'm doing, great, keep doing what you're doing, or I'm not happy. You know what? Turns out this is a really hard job, and I'm always looking for good tools. And if you're that guy, give PowerShell a kick the tires and see if it works for you. See if you like it.
So we no longer have Windows cattle and Linux cattle. We just have cattle.
You just got cattle, baby.
So there's an interesting comment. I'll read this briefly. This is from Reddit. Ghost Dan says there's actually a really decent amount of outside vendors that support PowerShell. Cisco, EqualLogic, NetApp, EMC, Dell, HP, etc. They all have PowerShell modules that make administration easier. I actually prefer the PowerShell modules to the CLIs on many of those. I just thought that was a great testament to the success of the concepts of commandlets. You know how they're kind of task oriented, they're higher level, and that's kind of like what you were talking about with VMware, where it seems like the people that didn't have PowerShell were a little they felt like they were missing out. Maybe they didn't know why they were missing out, but now they will.
Yep.
Now they'll have, it'll be more accessible.
Yeah.
I thought that was awesome.
Now, let's be clear. See, PowerShell has a point of view, right? I mean, you said it. High-level task-oriented abstractions that abstract the GORP, abstract the GORP into high-level task-oriented abstractions, render things as structured data and objects to be able to have an object pipeline, and then support a very wide dynamic range of scripting, from this loose and fast and loose bash style scripting to more formal scripting to very formal scripting, including classes and inheritance and all that. So we have a very strong point of view, and if that works for you, I think we got a good tool for you. And the reality is, I think when you get beyond the Microsoft is evil, embrace, extend, whatever, just throwing rocks at people, and stop and say, hey, there's this tool, and they're not charging anything for it. Maybe I ought to go kick the tires and give it a try. I think a bunch of people will really like it. And if they don't, if it's like close but not there, if it's really outside, you're like, oh, I need single letter parameter names. Like that's our deal breaker if any parameter has more than a single character. Move on. You're happy. You got what you want. But if we're close and you have some things that are missing, work with us. We'll fix the product and we'll adjust it.
I'm sorry. I was so into what you were saying, I forgot what I was going to ask you now. Let's see. Bring up the.
There's a question about the PS1 extension possibly being an issue on Linux. Do you have any thoughts about that? I think Keith was. I think that's where I saw that question.
Oh, I don't know what that issue would be. So I don't know.
I don't either.
Oh, extensions. Wait, so there's extensions and then there's that PS1 extension. There's a difference. So on Linux, what you can do is you can just call something foo, no extension. So in Windows, we use the extension to map to an object handler. In Linux, what you do is you put shebang, #bang, at the beginning of the file, and then you give a path for the handler. So it's completely different. And we'll have a best practice on this. The best practice will be you should put in your scripts #bang. Look, what you can do is you can just name your file foo and put #bang and then the path to PowerShell and put your PowerShell script in that. And that will work just perfectly. So if you're a Unix guy and you're going to stay on Unix, that's the way you do things. Happy days. Everything's great. If you want to write scripts that can work on both Linux and Windows, then what you want to do is you want to do that, but then also add the .ps1. It's perfectly fine. It'll work just fine on Linux. And it's not that unusual on Linux, frankly. But you can do that, and then that script will run on both environments.
Okay, cool. Thanks for clearing that up.
Yep.
So I guess that's almost an implicit, well, maybe explicit, way to say, hey, my script, my PowerShell script is known to work on Linux.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, very good point. Yep.
Maybe that'll become a convention then.
Yeah, because on Windows, we'll just completely ignore that. It's just a comment, #bang. It's a comment. oh, I ignore it.
So there was a question in the chat room about PS Direct. Was that a driver for some of the work, leading to open sourcing PowerShell and having it run cross-platform, being able to manage these things, on Nano Server, Hyper-V with one language?
Nope.
Nope. All right. I will tell Rich. The answer was no. Sorry. Other than VMware, are there other vendors that that we will see soon out the gate that you can talk about?
No. Basically, what we did was we had a limited bandwidth to work with partners because we wanted to make sure that if they had any problems, Johnny on the spot. We're going to help solve their problems. So we limited the number of people. There were a lot of other companies, vendors that I feel really bad that we didn't bring into the tent. But basically, there were two issues going on. One was, indeed, we only had so much bandwidth, and if we had more, we would have done a bad job, and some people would fail, and it wouldn't have been a good experience for people. The second is, if we did more and more, the risk of this leaking would have gone up, and they did not want us to leak this at all. So we were limited, in the number of partners we could contribute to. So if you're a partner out there and we did not reach out to you, I want to personally apologize for that. There's really nothing we could do. There's no slight meant to you. These partners are picked for very particular reasons. But no, now the door is open. We can work with anybody, and we will.
Awesome. AWS. That's I've seen a few people mention that. I know that I was.
Isn't that amazing? But
yeah.
Well, AWS is a partner.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were on the video today.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. We'll see. I can't catch everything, guys.
Oh, sure.
Well, right. So we had AWS, we had VMware, and again, part of this was to make it clear, right? To send the message about this being a Microsoft, as a new Microsoft story. We are going to work with whoever our customers need us to work with. That was the big message we wanted to send. And frankly, I also wanted to work with people who would be pretty healthily skeptical of us, right? We didn't want to partner with somebody who was just going to be like, yep, that's great, whatever you want to do. We wanted to have people who were going to be skeptical, who were going to be suspicious, so that we were beyond reproach, right? That we were doing exactly the right things. And if we weren't, they'd call us on it. So
I think we have time for one more question. I know you had a hard stop.
I did, yeah.
And this came up not just down in the chat room, but also in Reddit and elsewhere. The console, man, what can we do about the console? This has nothing to do with open source or Linux, but the console.
Windows console.
On Windows, yes.
Just keeps getting better. No, it does. Just keeps getting better. Look, we finally... I was going to say got our head out of something, but we finally got our head out of something, and that team is now working. They're improving the console. Look, here's the history. The history was that the console was designed like in a scary way, and anytime we touched it, bad things happened, and nobody wanted to touch it. Anyway, so we got in there and we started doing some, cleanup work and laying the groundwork. And so now, that team is investing. They're doing some good work. They added the transparency. They added the resizing. They changed things so that it's much faster now. And there are some additional changes, and I don't want to talk about them because I don't know whether they're public or not. But we've got some versions that's just going to knock your socks off. I mean, they're doing a good job.
All right.
So, but by the way, let me be more precise. They are interested in doing a good job, and they are very interested in hearing what you want from the console because they want to invest. They want to make the console great again, right? Well, I don't know if it was ever great, but they want to make the console great, and they're in the marketplace for that. Actually, you know what? Maybe I should hook you up with those guys. Maybe we should have them come on the show and tell them about the work that they're doing, and then hear feedback from you guys.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. No, they're doing well.
All right, I want to say thank you from
you very
me,
much
from the chat room. This has been awesome. Thanks a lot for your time, Jeffrey. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. My pleasure, my friends. My pleasure.
Have a good night.
All right. Cheers.
Okay. That was awesome. Now, are we still going?
We're
What do you
still
think,
going.
Jonathan? Okay. So
Do you want to keep going?
I could keep going. I think the chat room is on fire. Is one way to put that. I don't know if anybody in the chat room who has had a chance to kick the tires a substantial amount. I'm looking at you, Joel. I don't know if Trevor's in the room. There's probably several others. Keith Hill. Ping me and we can pull you into the Skype if you want to come on right now and chat. Jonathan, have you had a chance to run any of the code? Or I know you're not actually a Linux guy.
No. I watched the video today, so I saw it demonstrated in a few different ways by some of the people on the PowerShell team and then the guy from AWS. And they even had Alan on there via Skype talking about PowerCLI. So it's a great resource. We'll need to make sure we put a link to that in the show notes. And there was also a new PowerShell documentation type of page that's also new that I noticed that we need to put in the show notes that talks about, how to do the installation on your Mac or on Linux, that sort of stuff. So we'll want to make sure that we get that link as well.
I was I've had access to the bits for a little while, not a long while, like a week, and I got right in on the first moment that I could. I was reloading because I use a Mac every day.
Oh sure,
and
yeah.
I miss PowerShell. Like I seriously do miss PowerShell. And I whenever I need to automate something on my Mac, you know what I do? I pull up my Windows VM and I write things in PowerShell. Or I might labor through something in Bash or Python when I have to, kind of situation, but I don't like it. So I was super excited. Joel said that he could talk, so we could Skype him in. I was super excited about it. So I went ahead and grabbed it. I installed the binary package, or the installer rather, and it was quick and easy to install. I wanted it to be to use the Homebrew, which is kind of it's a packaging system for Mac OS that a lot of people use. That basically it's kind of like chocolatey, same end result. You can't do that today, but I did. I opened an issue in the GitHub repository, and it looks like that's gonna happen. But the install was easy. There's some caveats that you might expect. Some weird things that not weird, but when you're thinking about what you're typing in your shell, I don't know about you, Jonathan, but I always typed ls when I was in Windows PowerShell. Like I liked ls better than dir for some reason.
Oh, okay, sure.
So when I'm back in running PowerShell on a Mac, typing ls, the output isn't what it was when I was doing the exact same thing in Windows. So I have to kind of think about what it is that I'm doing a little bit.
Okay, Joel, you were on.
Hey, Joel.
I have that same problem. I always use whatever the shortest alias is.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
Yeah. PS, ls, yes. There's a whole bunch of them like that are like, oh, wait, that, And now I can't decide. This is the worst part. I can't decide if I should set the alias or just learn to type, GCI, because...
Yeah. I end up typing which and GCM a lot. I'll type something, it won't work like I expected, and then I'm like, oh, yeah. And then I'm, tracing down whichever it was that where it...
The thing that's biting me right now on... So... There are obviously, I don't know if you saw the tweet earlier today, somebody posted a screenshot of get command measure, and there's there's 1,300 or something, 3,000 something commandlets on Windows 10 and 265 or 300, I can't remember, but anyway, 200 or 300 on Linux, and he was saying 345. I think that's what it was, because he said it's 345 more than yesterday. But yes, there's a whole bunch of stuff I've been spending the evening going over because I haven't bothered up to this point. I haven't bothered trying to get my profile to actually work in this version of PowerShell because there were so many things that weren't done. At this point, I feel like, stuff works and my profile ought to work, and dang it, I want my prompt back. And so I started working on my profile, and I found most of the stuff, that doesn't work is just missing .NET types, which, there's no fix for. And the other stuff that doesn't work is like I haven't quite figured it out yet because I'm getting weird errors from my format files, right? So like custom
that at all.
custom format files and modules. I've got one in particular that I use to set the colors so that when you do dir in PowerShell in Windows, things come out colored like ls color in Bash. And I don't know if it's the color that's causing the problem or what. I haven't dug in yet, but there's a whole bunch of little things like that are like, okay, that's not supported yet, or that's not ever going to be supported. Like the one thing is the first thing in my profile has always been a check to see if you're holding down the shift key. And if you're holding down shift, then it turns on verbose preference so that you can debug what's going on in the profile. It's really cool. I love it. Especially when something goes wrong in my profile. But it doesn't work because I'm using a WPF class to check the keyboard. Right. And I spent about 20 minutes today trying to find a keyboard class in .NET Core. Pretty sure that it doesn't exist. Even console read character is implemented against an internal pinvoke library.
Let me stop you there for a second. What is a good process to find things in .NET Core? I'm trying to think. I've never looked at the differences.
Actually, it's funny. This is a very good question because a lot of the reflection stuff that I'm used to using doesn't work either. Right. So like I have a reflection module, right? So normally when I need to find a keyboard thing, I can do get type, KEY and star and see if there's a type that's called keyboard. And that whole module is not working. So what I ended up doing today, actually, I went on GitHub and did a search against the repository for keyboard.
Okay.
And then key state.
Well, tab completion works great. So I know I can go left bracket, system dot tab. Do you want to display all 165 possibilities? So it's going to show me stuff. So I need to write some wrap or something that'll enumerate all those guys and let me search.
By the way, hot tip for those of you who have tried to make a prompt in PowerShell not on Windows. So oddly, PowerShell core on Windows seems to behave properly. Not on Windows. If you write host in your prompt, somehow they capture that as output. So they display it because you did write host, and then they display it again because they captured it as output.
Oh gosh.
So you can't write host. Instead, you have to just echo the string. Output the string.
Right.
So use ANSI escape sequences.
Oh no.
To do colors, right? And you're good to go. And that works in Windows Windows 10 and in Unix. Because you can use ANSI escape sequences in the Windows 10 console now to do colors. So
that makes me feel very awkward.
But I've always used write host in my prompt because I do colors, in my prompt that mean things. Or I do change the background color to separate things. So, yeah.
Case
also,
sensitivity.
Another tip. This one killed me this morning. I wanted to try. So there's a setting for input RC where you can set, and now I can't remember off the top of my head, but you can set to disable case sensitivity in tab completion, right?
Really?
Now this works
What?
in Bash. That's what you do in Bash, and I wanted to see if it would affect PowerShell at all because it really should, right? But when I tried to set it, I tried to do it by typing the string in quotes and redirect, like append, with the double arrows.
Okay.
To append to the end of input RC, and I got this weird thing where where the characters showed up in input RC, but with null spaces in between them because
an
it was
encoding thing?
Unicode. Because PowerShell wrote it in UTF 16. So
yeah, so you'd have to
that
like
could be-
add content with the encoding parameter or something.
No. You can outfile as of PowerShell 5.1. You can set PS default parameter values outfile :encoding equals UTF-8, and that affects the redirect operator as well.
Okay.
So magic, but but if you don't do that, you're going to be very surprised when you try to append to a PowerShell or a Bash or a Linux text file for that matter.
Gotcha. Let's see. I wanted to. Oh, yeah. So case sensitivity, not basically when you're trying to do tab completion. That's where it hit me.
Yeah, everyone should do a search for that issue on the. I mean, everybody that cares should do a search for that issue on the PowerShell repo. There's an ongoing discussion about what should be case sensitive and what shouldn't. Because one of the things that are case sensitive right now are module names, which is just wrong.
Yeah.
But we had
I'm
this
looking
whole
to see if I can find
conversation
that,
because Oshin and I were saying like module, like yes, because they said they had to be case sensitive because modules are folders, right? Which is true, except they're not, right? Modules are in folders, and yeah. And on the PowerShell gallery and in many other places, they can't be case sensitive. The idea of having them suddenly become case sensitive is terrifying. So because if they were case sensitive on Linux, then you'd have to support case sensitive in the gallery, and then you'd end up with things that wouldn't work on PowerShell Windows just because they couldn't exist, right? Anyway. So there's a whole bunch of stuff about that, but yeah, I think that we'll end up with tab completion. It should work either way, but it should complete to the right thing because obviously file system is case sensitive in Linux, right?
Right. Cool. It's issue 1273 for those following along at home. Thank you, chat room. There's a couple others that are related to that. All right. What else? What other known issues or things that are big that work or that don't work? I mean, it is an alpha, so we expect.
Yeah. Well, the thing that got me excited this morning was watching the video that they posted, like Channel 9 video that Jeffrey did with a whole bunch of other people. I believe that the module that Joey Aiello demoed, I think that's in the demos. So I think that's available. That's the cron tab module. I told him it needs to be integrated into scheduled tasks. I want one module, not three. But meaning I want one module for scheduled tasks, right? It should work on Linux or Windows and just know what to do. But
that goes to the question I raised with Jeffrey about services.
Yeah. Well, so this is it's a big question. We as a community, but Microsoft as the authors of the shell are going to have to deal with a whole bunch of questions around how do we do this? Because like yesterday I tried to come up with a simple demo and completely failed. I tried to come up with a simple demo of a case where I was trying to figure out, I need an assembly, right? It's built in on Windows, system.net SQL client, right? The system.data.SQL client.SQL connection class. I need to do a SQL query. So this thing is just built into the framework when you're on Windows. It's just there already. You just do add type assembly system.data. But it's not built into .NET Core.
So can you add type on an assembly that was
Add
compiled
type
against
assembly in .NET Core does not work at all.
Okay.
What it does
right?
is it searches for a DLL of that name in the current folder. I'm not sure what the point of that is. I hope that will change, but I don't, there's no GAC. So,
right.
I mean, on the email thread, I suggested that maybe we need one.
There could be a library folder. That's the way I would kind of handle that.
We could have a PowerShell GAC, not an actual GAC, because it would just be PowerShell local, right? But there could be a libraries folder just next to the modules, and we could put DLLs in there in folders, and but yeah, I mean that's kind of.
Did I understand correctly though that a DLL that works that's compiled against .NET Core, that same file, it can work cross-platform?
Yeah.
Maybe it doesn't right this moment, but it can, right?
That's what he said.
Okay.
But I think it has to be compiled against .NET Core, right?
This is where the question came. Where I was going with this was when I downloaded the SQL client. If you go on NuGet and look at the SQL client library Microsoft has put on NuGet, it on .NET 4.6 and 4.5.2, it only requires system.data.common or .core. I mean system.data.core.
Okay.
On .NET Standard 1.2, it requires about 10 other assemblies. On .NET Standard 1.3, it requires 31, 41, something like that. A lot of assemblies. If I was going to ship like a SQL PS module, I would have to include every one of those assemblies in my module, right? Which is a nightmare because it means every module that does something with a .NET assembly is going to end up with. If you've ever seen like the JSON, the Newtonsoft JSON, that thing it has 34 dependencies, I think it is. So you want to do JSON, boom, 34 dependencies, and you're gonna reship them over and over. So we got to figure that out. There's got to be a better way than that. And especially because they're all the same, right? But the problem with the SQL client is they actually have a different assembly for .NET Standard 1.3, .NET Standard 1.2, .NET 4.5.2, and .NET 4.6. So if you wanted to use that on desktop, you'd need to ship the other assembly, at least one of the, the .NET 4.5.2 at least.
Right.
And I don't know how, like, you are going to have to write code to conditionally load it. And so my request is that they take care of that.
Joel, there's a question. Is the redirect operator modified in Linux, or does it behave as it does on Windows? Do you know?
How do you mean that? It works. Is that enough?
So, but I think you had said you had to account for the encoding, right?
Yeah, well, so if you redirect with text, it's using out file. So the encoding is by default UTF-16. You need to set the default parameter if you want it to be UTF-8, which is kind of what it should be on Unix. But like piping and redirecting, those work the way I expect them to. I'm not sure if there's supposed to be a difference with Linux versus Windows that I can't think of. So they work the way I expected to. I was able to append to a text file once I put the encoding in right. It didn't even screw up the text file. Now, the one thing I didn't check, by the way, is what new lines it used. Trying not to think about that. There was a bug
Good point.
early. There was a bug early on where the PS module path was using semicolons as the delimiter, instead of colons like it should on Linux. So that's been fixed. But yeah, I don't know what, like, I seriously don't know what the right thing to do is, because normally, right, if I'm going to write something for, like, say I wanted to write a binary app that's going to do SQL queries, I would compile it targeting each of my platforms, right? So I'd actually have a separate distribution like PowerShell does for Linux and for Windows, which is fine. But if I need to ship a script module that has this binary dependency, now I need to like ship 3 DLLs and check, am I in .NET Core on Windows, or am I in .NET Core on Linux, or am I in .NET? Because there literally is that SQL client. There's actually a separate .NET standard library for Windows and Unix. Now, not all of them are separate. A lot of the libraries just have one for .NET standard, but this one has separate ones because it must have some pinvoke or something that's, native. That is not a problem I know how to solve off the top of my head right now.
So to the
Like I
chat
said-
room, Joel wearing a Splunk T-shirt
Yeah,
because you can't always blame Canada. And no, I am not wearing one. I'm wearing a VCE VBlock T-shirt, for the record.
I'm wearing because ninjas are too busy.
Oh, it is Ninjas. My bad. I saw because, and it's kind of blurry. I couldn't really make it right.
Yes.
All right.
Even though I don't work there, I still have several T-shirts.
Yes. I'm sure if there's one day that I ever leave Splunk, I'll probably still have 20 shirts.
You will be smarter than I was, and you'll stack up before you leave.
I have a bunch.
My shirt
sure
is
you
a,
What
do.
does your shirt say?
my shirt is a Peachtree Road Race.
You ran this year, right?
No, I missed the sign up deadline this
Last year? You ran
Yeah,
it.
last year.
All right, guys. I am getting tired, so I need to cut this
Yep.
short.
Good night, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks
Had
for
a
the
great
post-show,
turnout. Thank you for
Joel.
coming, everybody, and thanks, Joel.
Yeah, no problem.
Good night, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. The end.